All this knowledge comes to different heads, to different minds. By using modern technology wisely and thoughtfully, we will, in the near future, be able to live a much freer, more independent and more fulfilling life. Everyone has evolved. In my circle, there isn't a single person who has fallen. I started asking the question, who am I? I used to think it was my fault, can you imagine? I just realized that this path of asceticism and renouncing material things is not for me. I just thought I was omnipotent and committed all possible sins. But in the end, it was a reset 2 years in pre-trial detention. I am the creator of this reality. Maybe life will start over after this. Friends, today we have a unique, incredibly interesting guest with us, Nikita Metelitsa. He's a serial entrepreneur, creator of integral development systems, an integral coach, methodology expert in development systems, biohacker, and a number of other very complex, smart, cool, and profound titles that I couldn't remember all at once. I can already feel that this is going to be an incredibly deep and awesome conversation. Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And overall, honestly, I think of myself simply as a person who, throughout life, is always uncovering new talents and gradually revealing the unique genius within. This journey of self-discovery is central to who I am and is the reason I have such a broad and diverse range of activities and interests. Alongside working on various projects and dedicating myself to creating systems for consciousness development, I also explore different methodologies, transformational programs, and products including those designed to help people. I truly love life itself, and this passion, that's why my list of hobbies and interests includes freediving to 30 meters, which is my deepest dive so far, and exhilarating experiences scuba diving with over 50 dives completed in various locations, alpine skiing on challenging slopes, snowboarding through fresh powder, and parasailing high above the water. What else? There's a lot actually. Music. I'm a DJ. I've been DJing since I was 19. Various instruments, many things. That's how life unfolds. I used to think that was my flaw. Can you imagine? No way. When I was about 20, maybe 20, 21, 22 years old, I had this idea that there are people who know exactly who they are. And they just keep hammering away at it, so to speak, and really push in that direction, becoming super qualified specialists in that field. But I would dive into one thing and it would work out for me there. I dove here, it works here. But I never really went deep into any one thing. I mean, for example, a few years ago, I climbed the Elbrus and became a mountaineer. I even have the badge at home, right? But I realized that I don't want to climb Everest. At most, maybe I'll go to Beluga, Kilimanjaro, maybe Kazbek, or somewhere else. Just over the course of my life. I'm not in a hurry. It's the same with many other things, kite surfing, surfing, and so on. So it's a certain degree of freedom now. I realize that for me personally, and that's why I have such a wide variety of activities and ways of interacting with the world and engaging with people around me. Before, I used to think it was a flaw. Like, why can't I find that one thing, that one version of myself to really dive deep into a specific field and become a top specialist or expert there? In the end, I realized that we're all different. At what point did you realize that this isn't a flaw, but actually your superpower in a way, and your strong connection to life, to reality? Probably about 6 or 7 years ago. I can't name the exact period because I kept studying myself, delving even deeper into self-exploration over the years, into the topic of self-knowledge, exploring various approaches to it, ranging from strictly magical and esoteric to philosophical, religious, and even scientific ones. Because, for example, when studying myself as a biomachine, as a physical body, I naturally had to dive into biochemistry, bioenergetics, biology, medicine, and of course, nutrition science as well. I became a nutritionist and a certified yoga instructor in order to understand biomechanics and so on. So all of this happened gradually. But you know what's most interesting? It's that we're all different, after all. And for some people, I don't know, hypothetically speaking, a Mozart who paints pictures, something like that is theoretically possible, of course. There are creators who work in different fields, but still, Mozart is Mozart. And he was composing brilliant music from a very, very young age. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, he wrote his first piece when he was 4 years old. And really, no one taught him music. He just sat down and started creating, so to speak. But for me, you see, it's a different story. It's about expanding consciousness into different areas of life, into completely different stories that most people wouldn't even connect with each other. So even when I was structuring the biohacking system as a system for managing health, longevity, anti-aging, including cellular regeneration, brain health support, and so on, I was already integrating those things back then. That was in 2018, and the beginning of 2019. Other biohackers, my colleagues, with whom I often share the stage at various seminars and forums, they didn't really understand at all how these things could be integrated. But for me, it was already clear. And it's not that I'm so unique, it's just some kind of manifestation, you know. Maybe you could call it genius, because everyone has their own kind of genius. There is a task, as I see it, for every person who is evolving in their consciousness to ultimately discover their own genius by combining certain talents. For some individuals, their unique genius will be found in one particular area or field, while for others, their genius will come together at the intersection of several different diverse talents. And that will be this person's unique personal way of expressing themselves to the world. Yes, and everyone has this. I am deeply convinced of that. And that's probably why I managed to be such an integrator, as I call it. There's Ken Wilber in the States, for example, he has his integral theory of everything and so on. I haven't studied him in depth, to be honest. But when I created my own system of integral development and started describing it all, it was only about 2 years later that I got a little acquainted with Ken Wilber. I realized, wow, that's really cool. So yes, in many ways, we're talking about the same things. And that's also amazing that truth, as we were talking about off camera earlier, truth and pure knowledge, the kind that truly helps people as a collective intelligence, as all of humanity together with planet Earth, to evolve, not to destroy this planet, not to wipe out animals or, in general, this whole world, so to speak, here on our planet. All this knowledge comes to different minds, to different people. And now, modern technology is truly helping us in an amazing and unprecedented way to spread this valuable knowledge much more actively and on a much larger scale than ever before. For example, if you read the inspiring story of Paramahansa Yogananda, a renowned yogi whose wise teachers sent him to the West to share the teachings of yoga with the world, and there were several such teachers. There are several interesting books on this particular topic, specifically about those whose teachers, so to speak, send them to bring this knowledge to the Western world. And just imagine how difficult that was, right? Back then, so to speak, Pigeon Post was still in use in a manner of speaking. And still, for example, even Paramahansa Yogananda would draw huge crowds in the States. He traveled around a lot there, and there wasn't enough space for everyone because there was this light, pure light coming from the person.
A human magnet, someone who showed by his very being that things in life could truly be different.
Yes, exactly. With the purity of his consciousness, with his vision of reality. And of course, yes, he was a teacher, a mystic, and so on. George Ivanovich Gurdjieff also drew crowds in his time. He had schools in New York, in Paris, and in Moscow until certain events occurred. And there are certain mystics, yes, including scientists and people from the world of yoga who, even when there was no such thing as the internet, as they say, were known all over the world. But now I firmly believe that the integration of advanced technology and human biology on the one hand can potentially lead to a transhumanist vision, which is currently being imposed and actively implemented by certain powerful forces in society, and which Pelevin describes wonderfully, vividly, and insightfully in his various books and literary works. Those who have read them will understand what I mean. And the other side of the story is that I see, on the contrary, that the integration of technology in biology, first of all, of course, it is 100% inevitable. And secondly, what all of these will lead to specifically on the level of the evolution of souls, of all souls, meaning all of us. And on the contrary, just think about it. If we use technology wisely, we can live much freer lives.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, because robots, drones, and various other systems will become the service staff, and people will no longer have to do certain hard labor, which is what many people live for now.
You and I are living at a turning point in time. Well, the year 2020, the COVID era triggered the transformation from offline to online, when so many processes started to accelerate, to become easier, to delegate many tasks and functions. And what used to be abnormal before has now become natural and familiar. We're experiencing a reset into a new era of thinking.
On the contrary, this played an evolutionary role for a huge number of people. For example, I don't have a single person in my circle of friends, family, or acquaintances for whom this period of time, these last couple of years, which have been challenging for so many, were considered a failure or anything even remotely like that. On the contrary, everyone has grown, everyone has evolved.
That's interesting.
There isn't a single person in my circle who has fallen behind. I mean, there were temporary setbacks, and it seemed to people like, oh God, this is terrible. For the ego, it's a loss. It's that feeling that everything's being lost, the world is collapsing. But in reality, what happened was a revolution or evolution for that person, their direction, their interaction with the world, and so on. Because if we even rise just a little above all of this to you could say, other planes of existence and perception of reality, then there is nothing that happens on this planet to any individual, to any soul, to any person in particular, that isn't meant to happen to them. I really like a phrase by Alexei Sitnikov, with whom I shared a stage a couple of years ago at a conference on the brain. God governs the world through laws. Or you could say this world is governed by laws, and God simply doesn't govern anything directly. He just created a certain legislative framework that permeates all the space in which we live. And relatively speaking, I don't know whether it's some kind of supervisory body or not, karmic or otherwise, cause and effect is also a law that operates. Everything just comes back to us automatically. And gradually, as a person evolves and expands their consciousness, they come to understand that it's not good to cause pain to others. And if a person develops even further studying principles, perhaps of yoga, then the principle of Ahimsa opens up. Ahimsa is not just simply do not kill, as is often thought of as one of the prohibitions or sins in Christianity, for example. Ahimsa means do no harm to any living being, the level of thought, on the level of speech, and on the level of action. So it's a much broader concept. And gradually we begin to understand that, we don't want to harm anyone or anything in this world. That's it. Well, this is just one example of evolution, because it will come back to you as well, especially if you do it consciously.
Yes, right. Let's go your way. From what we've already talked about and discussed a bit today, it seems clear that you have a very interesting and significant turning point in your life when you had multiple offline businesses running simultaneously, and at the same time you were also developing along a spiritual path. This was a period of real transformation for you. You mentioned that you worked closely with a spiritual mentor.
Yes,
and a business mentor. Will touch on that as well, that aspect of your development. So there were offline businesses, and then a turning point when you shifted more towards the spiritual path and online businesses. How did that happen? What was actually going on with you? You were version 1 all the way up until 2017, and now you're version 2. How are they different? What was that like?
To be more correct, the version that we have now is probably version 10.0 or 9.0. Because looking back at my state of mind before I turned 18, when I started actively engaging in self-exploration and delving deeper into myself, that was one version of Nikita Semyonov who felt something, saw things somewhere, somehow sensed that some unusual reality was waiting for him, but it was still far off. And then it started to materialize. And after that, there were several stages of evolution. Essentially in parallel.
Can you highlight them?
Yes.
I think for those who will watch our conversation, this could really serve as anchor points for their own development.
This, in principle, connects with two methods of evolution, or with a kind of dual perspective. The first is the story of the 7-year cycle, which is also a common concept, 7-year cycles.
7-year cycles of growth?
Yes, for me they are very clearly traceable. That is, I had a significant leap in evolution at 21, and the next leap happened right after a reset. I'll get to that a bit later at around 27 to 28 years old. And now it seems I'm heading towards some next evolutionary leap. Only now I can already see that this will be 99.9% an irreversible evolutionary leap. On the contrary, it will be a global expansion. Because the previous leap, when I was 27 or 28 years old, that was in 2017 and 2018, I experienced a total reset of everything. That is, I got divorced and left all my business projects. I had 3 of them, and I started asking myself, who am I? That's what happened when I was 27 or 28, after which for about 8 months, I wasn't really active in business, in other words. I did a project, a digital project, I'm very knowledgeable about marketing and websites. At that time, I was deeply involved in marketing and other parts of my business projects, while also focusing on spiritual development. It was all happening in parallel. And in my reality, even then, one could not be separated from the other. In other words, what I call integral development, holistic growth across 5 areas of life had already become very evident for me since I was about 22, because even at 22, I was able to travel, develop my family life, and be creative. I played musical instruments, and I still do, and I was DJing. In fact, I performed at a club for the first time back then. At the same time, I already had a project, actually 2 projects, 2 businesses at that point. So I had employees, a staff, some kind of system was starting to take shape and so on. And spiritual development is very dense. I mean, I would regularly go to Moscow twice a week for classes, developing extrasensory abilities, vision, and exploring the depths of, so to speak, esoteric knowledge. And so at 21...
Combination.
Yes.
Very unusual.
Usually, people get absorbed in one thing, right? And then somehow life starts to pull their attention towards something else. But in my case, you see, it happened simultaneously. And because of that, I managed not to get too carried away. Although I did have those urges, especially when I first started going to my next teacher, who happened to be my yoga teacher. I would often go on extended retreats. And sometimes I would just say, I'm gone for a few days. Please don't bother me at all during that time. I really need this. Naturally, it was every day, almost like on a Vipassana retreat, about 10 hours of practice a day. That is, it was yoga and meditation and many other things. And of course, at that time, as someone deeply studying Buddhism, I saw my path as leading toward enlightenment. By then, I was already a raw foodist. I switched to a raw food diet when I was 21. I was on a raw food diet for 4 years. And I had this vision, there's Dima Lapchinov now, we are friends, but back then he was an example for me. As I remember, he didn't eat anything at all at that time. He was a breatharian. Later, he went back to eating food. And I looked at all that and thought, it seems like my path is headed in that direction, towards enlightenment, breatharianism, all of that, maybe asceticism, and a complete rejection of desires and material things. And my teacher in principle promoted that as well. That is, there were quite large financial flows passing through him, but he himself is very ascetic, extremely ascetic. I don't know how it is now. I think most likely the same. But at the same time, for example, he built more than one retreat center and created many other things for people, for the world, for the evolution of many people. And at one point, I simply realized that this path of asceticism and withdrawal from material things is not for me. In fact, that's exactly why I didn't lose touch with reality, because I really did have thoughts about going off to an ashram and leaving everything behind. And it was business that kept me grounded. That is, this material responsibility, the people, the employees, the respect of these people and their families, because at that time, as the business owner, I was the youngest person in the company. All the people who worked for me were older than me, and some were twice my age, or even 3 times older. We had foremen who were over 60 years old, almost 3 times my age, and yet I was the owner of the business. And, it's an interesting thing. This really expanded my sense of responsibility, and I stopped thinking the way I used to. I realized even then that it's indeed possible to gradually move toward a state of enlightened consciousness, truly a fully enlightened consciousness. When I am everything and nothing, I am alpha and omega, in total contact with the source, with the creator, channeling his will into this world. There are absolutely no selfish motives or impulses. The ego is completely dissolved. When a human soul, comes into a body, yes, it has several tasks. In fact, all these tasks are revealed in a person's life through 7-year cycles. It's just that some people may reach this earlier. For example, some people come to spirituality and the concept of contact with the creator or the superconscious, and to a certain wisdom only when they are well over 50 or 60. But some people reach this much earlier, and we can see that. And the process of evolution has now accelerated. And it turns out to be quite an interesting and thought-provoking story. The soul's understanding of the material world actually happens through the body, and the body itself is the main and essential tool for realizing the soul's true potential, as I like to call it. That is, there is a point of attention that is not even in this body, not at all in this body, but in fact, the picture is assembled in this head. And there is a certain interpretation of reality, but there is a point of attention that is not in the body, as I clearly realize now. It turns out that through the body, I somehow manifest myself in this world. I say something, I create something, I build something, and someone probably is next to me or following behind me. And so it happens that as I gradually come to understand more deeply how everything works here, there is a simultaneous evolution that occurs both on the level of matter and on the level of the soul. This evolution is a process that unfolds over time, allowing for continuous growth and transformation. As this understanding develops, a person is given more opportunities to create, including the chance to build, to invent, to bring something new, and people start to be drawn in who help spread this even further, especially if it is constructive for the benefit of humanity's development. Yes. And now, especially after the year 2012, there has been a significant and highly noticeable shift, and we can very clearly and unmistakably see that all those people who have lost or squandered their capital of virtue, as I personally like to call it, over many, many years and even decades, for example, they may have achieved a certain level of financial stability and well-being, material success, or some other form of external accomplishment or recognition, but by wasting their capital of virtue, or tapas as it is called in yoga philosophy, sooner or later, inevitably, these people eventually and quite unavoidably hit rock bottom and face the inevitable consequences. And there are such examples among billionaires and many others. I spoke with one such person who had very significant resources. He said, at one point, I simply considered myself omnipotent. He had security, real estate all over the world, billions. And he said, I broke every possible sin. Really, that's how it was. If you take everything, and not just once, but repeatedly, he doesn't even want to remember it. But in the end, it was a complete reset, 2 years in pre-trial detention and so on. And now, even the way life brought him together with me wasn't for nothing we just met in the sauna. That's how it was. And he wanted to talk to me. And you can imagine how this happens, right? That's how it is. The person started to realize that things could be different, and his enormous potential embedded in him at the level of the spirit, the potential he came here with, which he actually did realize through the material world. But by breaking certain laws, by interacting with this world poorly and incompetently well, according to the laws, everything comes back very precisely. It's basically a karmic boomerang, you know. Cause and effect, relationships, the law of conservation of energy, all of that works very precisely. And as a result, now he understands that he needs to interact with the world differently. And if we return to the topic of 7-year cycles and the levels of consciousness evolution, we can see that life itself, or God, spirit, the absolute, and even the family lineage, by the way, yes, the earthly lineage, I'm talking about now, not the heavenly one, which is a bit different, by the way, gently pushes a person, gently guiding them toward meaningful growth, toward positive evolution. And usually, how do they push us? Through things that a person can understand. And how can a person understand, for example, there are problems with money, health, money, relationships? Most often. And according to these evolutionary cycles, the 7-year ones, as well as the perspective I have now, a person goes through a certain evolutionary path and expands their consciousness, passing through certain stages, which we already talked about a bit in another podcast. Life nudges us, pushes us forward precisely through money, relationships, and health. And if a person doesn't see that something is wrong with their money, for example, that's how it was for me. By the way, this is an amazing and interesting thing that has just come up about developing both materially and spiritually at the same time. Imagine I had a large staff of employees. I was already a fairly established entrepreneur. I was about 24 years old, give or take, right? And I hit this financial glass ceiling. At that time, to be specific, if we talk actual numbers, I was earning around 250 to 300,000 rubles.
With that many employees?
Yeah, a whole bunch of people. The total turnover was over 150 million rubles a year, over 150 million. I had a partner. Yeah. And basically, if you look at it on average over the year, I was putting about 250 to 300,000 in my pocket. Yeah, there were leaner winter months because we didn't do much construction in winter and still had to pay the staff. And the staff wasn't small. Just on the expense side alone, we had 4 to 5 million. You know, it's interesting. I don't understand what's going on. There's more responsibility, more employees. We're scaling up, growing, more contracts. And at the same time, the expenses are growing too. But why isn't my personal income growing? What am I doing wrong? And this is despite the fact that I was already practicing, working on the evolution of consciousness, spirituality, and many other things. I realized that I needed to dig even deeper into myself, to dig deeper and deeper into limiting thought patterns, into ancestral patterns that were embedded in me by my family system or the ancestral morphogenetic or morphic field, as it's called, and I started digging into that. And when I started to delve into this, to expand my understanding in that direction, do you know what happened? There was no immediate breakthrough. It was a process.
There's inertia. There's always inertia in any process.
It was a process, took several years, through a reset.
Along inertia.
Yes. Having gone through a reset, So imagine I really started to dive deep into working with my family lineage, into my own patterns, started working with a coach, began attending business programs, Be the Way. I also went through quite a few business trainings. None of them actually changed anything when it came to how much money I personally was making.
Amazing.
Amazing, I agree. And
because at that speed and at that scale, even a seemingly minor and subtle adjustment to some elements can, in a noticeable way, almost instantaneously have a direct and significant impact on the overall results.
What do you think that showed me? It showed me, yes, like reality, I saw it for what it was. That my task is to keep focusing seriously on spiritual development and to do everything I can to grow spiritually. And so, when did that happen? In 2016, I still hadn't grown. On the contrary, things actually got a bit worse. Then I left all business projects altogether, and on a physical level, it was like a reset, but in reality, I started earning a bit less money, although later it evened out again back to 200, 250, and in rare cases, 300, well, around 200, 250. So basically, that level stayed the same. I kept digging into myself. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? So look, my goal at that moment was precisely to understand who I am, what my main current self-identification is, and what I'm supposed to bring into this world. Specifically, what my purpose is, you could say, yeah, as that popular word goes. And when I understood that, which happened at the beginning of 2018, and when I started to take action, everything around me started happening in this magical, almost miraculous way. Ideas started coming to me. I organized a retreat, created my first business mastermind, in other words. I gathered entrepreneurs together. I was hosting the mastermind in person. Back then, that word wasn't even widely used yet. It was quite a rarity back then. I gathered entrepreneurs and we worked together. By then, I had a broad perspective in business and spirituality, covering both material and spiritual aspects. You know, there's this concept called the forum group. We also discuss things like relationships and health there. I even organized astro sessions outside the city with these guys. At the same time, entrepreneurs started coming to me for personal work. I began to motivate them, to help these people, some of them, to literally rise up from rock bottom. People would come in with completely lifeless eyes. Their income was, say, 200 or 300. They had a family and a business, but they were just lost. Some of them, honestly, had really sad eyes. And I managed in literally a month and a half to 2 months to just pull a person out, to lift him up like that. I evolved with him and he evolved with me. And that's how my coaching and psychotherapeutic work began.
What was the key factor at that moment that brought about changes in you, in your mindset, which then manifested in your actions and your finances? You reset yourself in the physical reality, entered a new level of self-exploration, started asking yourself, who are you? And in terms of money, you reached the same ceiling that existed in your mindset. And then something changes and you move forward.
Volume.
Opportunity.
The amount of value that I have brought and contributed to people over time.
Nice.
Yes, the amount of benefit. And,
when you were building a lot of different houses, it was in so many ways really kind of impersonal, actually.
That was a temporary stage for me on the one hand, and apparently I needed to go through it. It was necessary, both in terms of working with a business partner and at the same time to understand how business works and other things as well. Well, we could speculate for a long time about why I needed that, but at the time I felt like I was in the right place.
But the value of that exchange with the world was insufficient.
Well, even if I really try to compare how much value I bring now, because, back then we would spend an entire year building, and at best, honestly, it was just 20-something houses. Yeah, it's great, it's cool, it's interesting to build a place where people will later have children, start families, and pass it on to the next generation. Because we were building houses that would stand for more than 100 years. But another story is that right now, at this very moment, you and I are talking, and someone right now is watching one of my videos, one of my films, or something else I've made. And so they're in that state, and maybe, just maybe, their life will truly start anew after this experience. It's amazing how many people have written to me and said, Nikita, I watched your video or your film, and after that it was like I felt like I woke up, like I was truly awakened, as if from a long sleep. That's one awakened soul, just like that. That's cooler than building 10 houses. That's what I believe.
Absolutely. And That really resonates with me because the work that was my main activity for many years, we do design and renovations in Moscow and St. Petersburg. And roughly the same ideas that you're talking about now have been unfolding for me this year with my move to Balidat podcasts, sharing certain values and revealing powerful people to the world is a way to impact the lives of thousands of people who come into contact with this in some way. Whereas there we do 150 renovations a year. There we interact with a certain number of people to the fullest, but here the scale is completely different. Okay, you started to expand it, your visibility began to change through masterminds. Or what exactly triggered this expansion of your presence during that period?
All together, so just imagine, at the very same time that I was working one-on-one with people, I was also running one-day workshops, which I called my special Neuro Sundays. So there were all sorts of different practitioners working with the body, consciousness, psyche, breathing techniques. And that's also when nail therapy started. I started having people stand on nails in 2018, including it as one of the methods of body-oriented therapy. And on top of that, I did masterminds, I organized a retreat. And then by the end of the year, I realized that my goal was to unload all my knowledge, structure it, systematize it, and share it on a larger scale. And that's when the idea for the Institute of Biohacking and Health was born. And for a month, I was unloading all my knowledge. At that time, I had actually almost written a book. It just didn't come out as a book. It was released as a product, as an online course. And we created this product. Back then, I had a partner, and together we built all of this. He was responsible for the marketing side, and I was in charge of the product, of all the biohacking content itself. And that's when a new period of deep immersion began for me, a very intense dive into what is now called the info business, right? In other words, info entrepreneurship, where there's an online school, a product line, marketing, traffic, funnels, and so on. And it turned out that I wrapped up the mastermind project. I temporarily stopped holding live events for an extended period of time. I focused wholeheartedly and entirely on this direction.
So it was just a matter of separating things so as not to scatter your attention, to devote yourself fully.
Do you want me to tell you the key now? On one hand, it was very useful and valuable, but on the other hand, it was actually a bit of a mistake on my part.
It slowed things down because the horizon became shorter for everyone involved.
Let me explain. It's an interesting thing. When I analyze myself, and since 2016 I've been tracking all my income and expenses completely from start to finish, down to, well, maybe not every single ruble, but give or take 100 or 500 rubles, you know. So when I later carefully analyzed what was really happening, because my income shrank once again when I totally focused on the institute, for some reason that I couldn't quite explain, my income actually dropped by about 1.5 to 2 times again.
Interesting.
I thought, what's going on? I don't understand what's happening. On the one hand, I started to blame this partnership, but on the other hand, I realized that I am the creator of this reality and everything revolves around me. If this is happening, it means that I'm not seeing things correctly or not doing something right. And in the end, what started to happen? I realized that, in fact, my thing is having several simultaneous sources of income.
Yes.
And when I narrow my focus to just one thing, my income narrows as well. That's how it is in my reality.
You stop realizing your true potential
of a broader spectrum, you know? I mean, we can realize ourselves in many different ways. For me, that's 3 or 4 main sources. And sometimes there's a 5th or 6th, some kind of micro streams. So the goal is to create open sources of income. That's what I call them. And to create, to be creative, to bring value into this world. And then since these sources of income are open, they're not blocked by things like fixed salaries or anything else, right? For more than 15 years, I've been completely self-employed. It turns out that the world has the opportunity to give back to me from different places, from different sources. And suddenly, when I realized this, when I became aware of it, I continued doing all of this. Although, honestly, there were 2 times when I wanted to quit everything, to give up the Biohacking Institute, to abandon this whole online structure. We even took investments back then, around $20,000 or even $25,000. I think it was $20,000 in investments, because we thought we clearly understood where to invest them, like real startup founders, right? To grow and to multiply. But that was just what we thought. In the end, after about 3 months, the money was gone and nothing had grown. And we still owed the money. That was a whole separate story in itself. How did that happen? It was completely unclear. I mean, we were so sure about what we were doing and where we were putting that money. And I had business experience, and at that time my partner also had pretty good business experience. And yet this is how it turned out. And I remember, just like it was yesterday, how I kept asking myself how life leads us with hints and signs. I used to go to a fitness center, you know, the usual setup, sauna, hammam. After working out, I'd lie in the hammam, put my legs up on a wall, just lying there. And then I had this thought. Well, there really was a moment when, well, it didn't work out and maybe I should give it all up. Maybe I should just forget about it. I know how to start businesses. Maybe I should just go back to business. And you know, right at that very moment, literally just a few seconds later, at the other end of the hammam, an older lady, probably well over 60 years old, says, "Young man, could you please tell me why are you lying there with your legs up on the wall? Is there a particular reason for that? Is that really the right way to do it? Or is there something I'm missing here?" And in that instant, I had this realization that even here and now, in this very place, in this moment, I'm getting a clear, unmistakable sign that my mission is to keep sharing this knowledge with the world, no matter what happens, no matter the situations and circumstances, no matter where I am, wherever I may be. Because even now, when I started to doubt myself, when all these silly thoughts began swirling around, making me want to give everything up, it's like the whole outside world is telling me, your knowledge is needed, keep going, no matter what happens, no matter how hard it gets, you won't go hungry. And I didn't go hungry. Money came in, of course.
Goosebumps.
Man, I get it. Money would come in for food, for rent. And, you know, I also think that at that moment, my trust in God was being tested.
Yeah.
100%.
Your intention to follow your own path. A few days ago, we had a conversation here, podcast with Spartak. He's a major fitness blogger, and together we came up with 5 rules for bloggers on how to grow and expand their audience. He laid them out and then said, listen, there's one more. He said, when I was just starting out, my friend who in some ways became my mentor and already had an audience of 300,000 people on YouTube at that time told me one thing. He said, look, you've just started filming, you've already reached 1 million on TikTok. You want to quit your job and you're going to face different challenges, different moments when reality will ask you, are you really sure? And throw events at you that will knock you off course and make you want to give up. He said, the most important thing is just keep going. No matter what happens, no matter what state you're in, just keep going, no matter how hard it gets, no matter how demotivated you feel, no matter what kind of feedback you get from reality or from people. Just keep going. And even when you think it's just absolutely impossible to do anything anymore, just keep filming.
Here, I can definitely agree with that, because at some point over the years, I've actually filmed quite a lot of videos. In fact, to be more specific, it's well over 300 videos for the YouTube channel. And not just any videos, but done professionally. We take our content very seriously in terms of quality. I'm not even mentioning how many live streams, how many posts there have been. It's literally hundreds and thousands. YouTube started to grow more actively. And there were moments of real surges when I experienced an evolutionary leap.
Awesome. It's also amazing how that works. And in terms of money as well, right? For example, I grew to the point where my income reached 500, 600, even 700,000. And that was a few years ago. I think it happened around the end of 2019 or the beginning of 2020, when I cut off all the relationships that were really draining my energy. At that time, I was also in a relationship. And there was a whole separate story there with a girl, and with my father, and I call that a black hole. The point is that a lot of my masculine potential was draining into that black hole, because it's impossible to close a black hole related to your father, an unhealed wound, so to speak, right? And I tried to fix it with all my might, but it didn't work. And as soon as I completely cut off the relationship, as soon as I focused on a clear understanding of who I am and what I am and continued on that path, and at the same time I took a vow of celibacy again for the second time in my life. It turned out, actually no, that was already the third time, by the way, celibacy or abstinence, so to speak, right? That is no sex, nothing at all.
So the focus was on creativity, on projects. There was growth, but at the same time I was also working with a therapist, a coach, and an energy therapist. certain things were being brought to light for me. So, on the one hand, it was a gradual evolution, but on the other hand, at some point, bam, and growth would happen.
A leap?
A leap, but I can't say that anything specific contributed to it. There are some elements you can single out, but overall, it's still a journey.
Usually, it's some kind of accumulating potential. When we go and create various precedents of outgoing actions, when we change in different ways and some point of accumulation of this potential is reached, then suddenly something clicks, some belief changes, often just a simple idea, something very simple happens, and we grow.
Yes, and by the way, even if you look at the system of consciousness evolution, there are, so to speak, platforms or circles. I actually have a few drawings that show how I illustrate this. There are steps between these platforms, and there can be a lot of these steps, even 1,000. But when you really, for example, reach the level of what I call awakened consciousness, there are certain criteria for why a person can be said to be at the level of awakened consciousness, right? Everything expands for them at the same time, and it may seem like some kind of leap has occurred, but in fact it's really accumulated potential that has simply now manifested itself in the world.
There's an interesting point also from my own observations that there are two factors. The first is the accumulating potential, but that's not necessarily potential that gets realized. There's a trigger factor that initiates the transition. Here there are really two different elements: the accumulation and the transition factor. Sometimes, even without fully accumulating the potential, if you apply the transition factor, the transition will happen, but its scale may fluctuate. And sometimes there's a large accumulated potential, but if there's no transition trigger, it can just dissipate into nothing.
And the transition trigger, again, often lies in mindsets, thought patterns, the way we perceive reality and so on, in generational patterns.
Usually a person can't unpack them alone. Someone is needed, like a guide, an event, or
an external factor.
An external factor that will trigger the transition.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that.
Listen, we've just come up with a cool formula in our conversation. I wasn't aware of it before, I just felt it. And it unpacked for me while we talked.
And what does that tell us? It means that we need to keep developing, to keep expanding. And for example, I am very grateful, Liz. For the past year and a half of my life, or even more, there has been a spiritual teacher who highlights things I don't see, and thanks to whom I have grown a lot. I am very clearly aware of this. And thanks to this, I now have a wife, and together we are growing and evolving. And this teacher, my teacher, has also become her teacher. So, in other words, we share one teacher between the two of us. We go together to her retreats. And we evolve together, not only so that we share a common view of reality, but also to clear out all the remaining programs, the unnecessary things, and the traumatic experiences that may still be present somewhere. Because a person is like a multi-layered cabbage, where your pure self with its potential for expression is like the core. And on top of that, there are lots and lots of layers, like cabbage leaves. And what's also interesting, the way I see it, the person's task is not to wait until these leaves start to rot and it becomes really painful, right? So that it doesn't hit you financially or in terms of health or in relationships. The task is to consciously, deliberately, and intentionally move towards evolution, therapy, and self-work. So that before these leaves, so to speak, start to rot, metaphorically, you are already carefully and gently peeling them away, gradually and patiently unpacking your core. And then evolution won't be forced upon you by 7-year cycles where life keeps pushing you, but instead you'll be proactively evolving on your own and will have reached a certain level of joy, love, and wisdom by, say, 35 years old. Meanwhile, many people at 35 are still asking themselves, who am I, what am I? Or very often they are still stuck in those same old achievement-driven models.
That delay happens because there are 7-year cycles which are described as leadership cycles. There are 5-year professional cycles, and it's important to complete them fully. Honestly, we still have so many things we want to ask, discuss, and there's just an absolutely incredible depth here, truly remarkable and fascinating. I want to, wrap up what we've been discussing into a logical, complete picture with 2 short questions as well. One that actually unpacks into 2 separate parts. There was this significant transition to an entirely new and higher level through the mastermind experience. And you mentioned that 2 or 3 months ago, you had another transition from 1.5 to 3 million, and a few months ago the club appeared. So the factor of the club as a phenomenon in your life and its impact on what you do, on your income and the factor of the transition that just happened. Could you unpack that? And we'll wrap up today's conversation with this.
Yes, let me unpack that. If we talk about the amount of value delivered to this world, what does delivered mean? It's not just when someone watches a video and then moves on, like it often goes in one ear and out the other, but when something actually changes for them. They start to see or apply something differently in their life. So the goal then is to increase the amount of value delivered. And for example, the same club model that we created allows a person to, say, pay a small amount of money or club is actually very inexpensive considering the amount of value we provide, because just one live practice session, if you convert it to rubles, costs about 50 to 60 rubles. And all our sessions are live. We have dance movement therapy, neurographics, meditations, analysis sessions, live broadcasts. I teach yoga and much more. And myofascial release really a lot. We've even added singing and fitness classes now because 70% of our members are women. And that's great, right? To unlock creativity, that's the flow state. And we understand that. So in this way, a person starts to value it more than just a YouTube channel. Although, honestly, if you just sit down and watch all my videos on the YouTube channel, you'll experience such an expansion, especially if you take it seriously. And some people do that. They watch closely and take notes. But most people don't.
Discipline.
Yes, there's a lack of discipline, not enough values. But when a person joins the club, even if they've paid just a little money, well, nowadays it's like, I need to go somewhere, attend this, attend that. A person gets hooked. Real expansion happens, a gradual evolution of consciousness. They become a greater conduit for light, love, joy, and wisdom. And gradually what happens, well, I grow along with them in the same way. We grow together. In other words, it's a shared evolutionary path. And it turns out that through this, people also feel me more, feel my wife, feel us, they sense that we are sincere, that we are open, that we don't have any ulterior motives, like trying to profit as much as possible or come up with some complicated schemes. We are open, we say things as they are. We don't even filter the knowledge that we share, whether it's in public broadcasts or private ones. That is, if something comes through in the flow, we open up and share it. Sometimes, yes, it's better not to go too deep into a particular topic because there's a whole ocean behind it that would have to be revealed. That's logic. But overall, this evolutionary transition happened, first of all, thanks to truly working together with my wife. We really, truly honed each other's edges, absolutely illuminating one another in the process in every possible way, wouldn't you agree, right? Almost like in the process of enlightenment, so to speak. And secondly, it's the constant, ongoing and never-ending work on oneself. And at the same time, this work is done together with a teacher, with a mentor or a guide. And also, there is interaction with the world around us, because the world gives us subtle hints, clues, and valuable guidance every single day. In other words, it's not about stopping at some fixed knowledge, but about constant flexibility and the willingness to let go of what you believed in just yesterday, so to speak, right? So it's a process of continuous evolution. Thirdly, it's also about working with the body and constantly practicing in different ways. That is, it could be, I don't know, breathing exercises, standing on nails, something else, retreats, there's a lot of different things. Well, let's put it this way. Right now, it's the beginning of April. This year alone, I've already invested about $1 million, maybe around 1,200,000 in my personal development. I keep track of everything it's already paid for.
I understand. Last year invested 3M in education.
Here. Exactly. That is, well, it becomes natural that a certain stream goes all the time into your self-development. And then, of course, there's the film I created in the flow, which currently has 1.4 million views and it keeps getting more. That was pure service with no intention to make money from it. Yes, we did mention there that, guys, if you find it valuable, you can go here. But in reality, all of this is done purely in the spirit of service. Because I clearly understand that those who need it will follow me, will walk alongside me, will go through some programs or come to a retreat. Or if it's a person with a certain high income level, an entrepreneur, as has happened more than once, they found me through YouTube. And for example, tomorrow I'm flying to Dubai on a business trip to meet one of these people who found me on my YouTube channel. He says, started doing your exercises. This is quite a well-known person. I won't publicize who it is right now. That's it. And he says, I realize it's time for me to dive into this topic. And you know what happened? By the way, it's amazing. He followed me on Instagram. And I also keep an eye on who follows me, especially those with verification badges. Well, that's interesting, I think. All right. And then I noticed he liked a couple of my posts there. Well, in short, it manifests itself somehow, but it doesn't write to me himself. So a week or two goes by, I'll write it myself, I think. Let's take a proactive approach. So I say, hey, hi, I see you're watching me there, reading my stuff. Maybe you have some kind of request after all? It's not for nothing, after all. Yes, he says, I do have a request. So in the end, we called each other, got in touch, and now maybe there will be something interesting we can do together. So it's important not only yes, it's not just that the whole universe is guiding me, but sometimes you feel that you need to take some action, something proactive, like, for example, writing a message. Right now, I'm writing a book, and I realized that if I want to have it finished by the end of this year, I need to put in at least another 100 hours, maybe even 150. It's serious work. And right after we finish here, I'm going to go get myself a smoothie or something else, healthy and tasty, and then sit down to keep writing the book.
Ooh.
That's it.
I can't help but ask another question that's already become a standard for this segment, and it's a really interactive one. Imagine that for some reason all your projects have become inaccessible to you. You, with all your background, experience and knowledge, you are still who you are. But specifically, all these projects, you no longer have access to them, and you're at a point of, well, a physical reset, but you are still who you are. And you join us as a partners, the third partner in the project, in podcasts, in segments. We're also planning to create a club now. Basically, it's about building a community. How would you go about developing it?
Definitely, since you are based here permanently, it would be about creating something lively, some live events, so that people are also drawn to the live energy. Next, of course, is to understand what the further essence is. If we're talking about three partners, then it's about synchronizing our values and vision where we're headed. And this is a very important task for the owners to clearly understand what exactly we want to achieve. Not in a month, but ideally in a few years. For example, I have a clear vision of what I want to achieve in a few years. And it's not just online. It will definitely be offline as well, a full-fledged human development center. And I've been working toward this for a long time. I'm just gradually reaching a certain stage of evolution. Well, let's say none of this exists yet. Here, I clearly understand that first, we need to synchronize to align our goals and intentions. First of all, what are we working toward? And secondly, we need to start taking action much more proactively, taking the initiative whenever possible. And of course, as we all know, earning money as well. If you're saying that I can't use anything from my previous projects, then that means my income has also reset to zero. So my task at this moment is to earn a certain amount of money, but I understand that we're talking about some kind of emerging startup, and I have a certain level of knowledge. So I realize that I also need to develop and build up this entrepreneurial venture in parallel, yes, as a co-founder. And at the same time, I need to develop myself, do something that will help other people. And for other people to notice me, I have to put myself out there. There's no other way. So it's all about visibility. This is a performance. And definitely, if I have a phone, I record videos myself and upload them to YouTube. And I start doing all of this from scratch on my own.
What would you adjust in monetization? And based on your current experience and knowledge, what would you contribute to such a monetization project?
First, you need to understand what the monetization will be based on, what value it will offer.
What we see now at this moment in time is a number of different levels and ways of how we want to interact with the world, with the people around us in our daily lives. The first and simplest is that there will be open content and closed content. That's a subscription.
Well, like sponsor, something like that.
Well, there will be several subscription tiers. There's a subscription you pay once, and it gives you a chance to be part of what we do. There's a recurring subscription, like a club that we'll be forming and creating. There's a level that's specifically a community of like-minded people. This is a business club that will have its own program, trips to different parts of the world, and powerful personal growth for people within this process, all united around an expert, where the experts are members of the club, and we built a community around strong, influential people. The third level is the X show. This is a reality show about increasing your income. Just add $1 million to your income in a month. This is something we already launched. It's monetization that comes directly from YouTube and TikTok video views generated by people watching your content. And it's affiliate programs with the experts who join us. You have a club, and we'll talk about it in this video so that those who feel drawn to it can follow the link. It will be a joint stream, something that hasn't existed before. For now, that's really roughly the picture we have.
Everything you've mentioned are working schemes. The main thing to keep in mind is to carefully distribute your attention among all of these different working schemes, and either make absolutely sure that this particular model really works as intended, or perhaps and scale it up, really push it, or realize that something's off and we've just overthought it, and not from a different level, right? The one from which we should actually be truly, genuinely, and fully realizing our potential and finding exactly that. Because nowadays, the one who wins is the one who finds the potential for scaling the fastest, the one who tests as many different hypotheses as possible.
This was just an incredible meeting, an amazing conversation. I'm really grateful to you for all the awesome things you shared today. I truly got a lot of genuine enjoyment from everything that happened here and from you. You're amazing.
Thank you.